but I need the updates. I need my mad upgrades, bro. Anyway, one of the issues with a lot of these places that have gone through this process of modernizing and developing factories has been pollution. These are two pictures of the same place in Beijing, the capital of China. On the right is pretty much what it's like most of the time. On the left is what it's like during the monsoons. You know, these monsoons, these winds that blow away all of the smog and everything that kind of collects in the city, being blown elsewhere. So there's been a significant amount of pollution problems that have come along with this pumping out of smoke and other pollutants and particulates into the atmosphere. And basically, China's been trying to start dealing with these problems by instituting more reforms into what is allowable in terms of the amount of pollutants allowed into the air, things like that, and starting to kind of create a few more barriers to pollution. That being said, there's also a lot of pressure to just not have environmental controls because that's one of the main reasons that businesses go there, is so that they can save money by not having to build these advanced factories and just have issues. Next issue on our list is HIV/AIDS. We talked about it in Africa, now we're talking about it in Southeast Asia. A lot of the same problems that we're going to see happen in sub-Saharan Africa are going to happen in the Pacific region. Basically, just put it in other words, HIV/AIDS has widely spread throughout Southeast Asia. A lot of this has to do, again, with a lot of the same problems we have in Africa, is lack of education about how the disease is spread and preventing it from spreading. I think sometimes we don't quite realize that Southeast Asia is pretty fragmented. It's undergone quite a few revolutions in the past few years. And so a lot of kind of similar problems we have in terms of violence in Africa, we have the same thing happening in Southeast Asia. Now, there's been some attempts to try to educate folks, and teach folks that this is a problem. But it's met with some success, some failures. We also have instances of conflict within countries, between different peoples. First example is this area, which is known as Kashmir. It's an area that's been fought over from India and Pakistan for years. The next is this area called the Gaza Strip. It's between Israel and the Palestinians. Territory has been under fighting, and of course locally now it's Syria. Syria can be added to this list, although I don't have a slide of it right now. This is what's undergoing right now. Is essentially you have a regime that's being supported by Russia and a group of militant fighters supported by the United States and its allies, and then you have ISIS right smack in the middle of it. It's a mess. It's a hot, hot mess. Basically what's happened is, if we go back to the Cold War, this was a proxy war fought between Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time, and the United States and its allies. And essentially, in order to avoid an outright war, we would support one side of the civil war, Russia would support the other side, and sort of like they would fight. And whichever side won, that kind of like was the winner on that side. So basically, if you look at Vietnam, North Vietnam won that conflict, so Russia kind of won that conflict, Russia and China, whereas America lost because South Vietnam fell. So it was a series of proxy wars. Well, the same thing, more or less, is happening in a lot of those other places, because what happened is after the Soviet Union collapsed, after the Cold War, a lot of these places were destabilized. A lot of these places actually had kings. If you look at like Iran, for instance, they had a Shah. And when the United States supported the Shah and he was overthrown, we kind of left, and so there was this Muslim revolution, and they ended up forming this much more stringent, much more conservative theocracy based upon it, and against the West, they saw as interfering in their country. Other places weren't so lucky. If you look at, for instance, Afghanistan, they had a king that was supported initially. Hang on, let me think about this for a second. I think he was supported by, yeah, he was supported by Russia. So we supported a group called the Mujahideen, which was a freedom fighter unit, which we probably call terrorists today, who then fought against the Russians, fought against the king, and when the king was overthrown, Russia withdrew itself. And all these different freedom fighter groups broke out, and basically the Taliban was one of them that was part of the Mujahideen that ended up sort of solidifying control in Afghanistan, and then used the same weapons we had given them to fight against the Russians to fight against us. So long story short, a lot of the problems that we're seeing here in Syria, in Palestine, were all caused by this great game between the United States and the Soviet Union. That's called the Cold War. I should have said great game because that actually is a whole other similar Cold War, only was between Great Britain and Russia. Now, of course, in Palestine, one of the problems they have is the use of rockets. Basically, terrorist organizations will use these and fire them into Israel, and Israel responds by sending in troops. The problem, though, is you can't really tell who's a terrorist. I mean, they don't dress in a military uniform. They're not the enemy soldiers of a foreign power. They dress like regular old people. And the thing is, they tend to use children as deliverers of bombs and as soldiers and couriers. So
I saw that in American Sniper.
Yeah. So this is an issue when it comes down to how do you fight an enemy you can't really identify. What if you accidentally kill civilians? It absolutely does happen. Some people just don't care and they just kill civilians.
Everyone because there's no one can be trusted.
Right. So this is, of course, a problem. It's blurring the line between the military conflict. That's why you often hear folks say, like, you know, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq weren't actually wars because we didn't go to war with, like, a nation. There was no declaration of war by Congress. It was really more of a police action. That's why people get a little upset saying that, like, the president is overextending his powers because technically speaking, he's not allowed to wage war with people. That's Congress gets to do that. Now, once Congress gives them the go-ahead, okay, they can fight wars, i.e. what happened in World War II. But what happens whenever he's involved in, you know, things like Afghanistan and Iraq? Isn't that technically war? Should we be declaring war? Well, yeah, but it's not against an enemy power. It's against, like, it's a policing action, so it doesn't have to declare war. It just gets really muddied, and really, to be perfectly honest, the Constitution does not answer any of these questions. It's really muddled. This is why laws are created in the first place, by the way, because let's be honest, the Constitution is really kind of non-specific about a lot of things. I mean, for goodness sakes, you look at something as simple as the freedom of speech. Okay, you can say whatever you want. Well, no, you can't in certain circumstances because of this, and basically starts to get pretty muddy, is the long and short of this. Let's talk income inequality. All right? This map shows I'm trying to remember what exactly it shows. It's the annual income of India as it's stratified by the amount of people that are in it and also the amount of money they make. I'm not exactly sure how to read it because I don't remember what all the numbers stand for. But essentially it looks something like this. The vast majority of people are incredibly poor in India. One of the poorest places on earth. Those who are climbing towards the middle class are almost half of the poor. Again, less than half are the middle class until you get to the very top where you get to a very, very small percentage of the population are what we call rich, and they are the super rich. So basically, long story short, what this means. In order to have a healthy economy, one that is doing really, really well, you want a stronger middle class. Essentially, the middle class is who drives changes. They're the ones who buy stuff. Because the poor can't afford it. And the rich are such a small percentage that they don't really have a major impact on all these types of things. For instance, look at the proliferance of iPads, okay? Now, if we were to look at iPads 10 years ago, how many people had them? Well, assuming it was even around then, I don't remember when the iPad first came out. Let's find that out real quick. You want to look that up real quick on your phone? When was the first iPad released? I'm curious to find this out because I'm thinking about this. I was like, well, I started Prez, and I don't think tablets were really around then.
April 3rd, 2010.
Yeah, so they weren't even around 10 years ago. So think about that for a second, right? 10 years ago, they didn't exist. Tablets were another thing. Now they are. How has things in school changed because of tablets?
We become more technology based. Yeah, some schools don't even like use notes or take anything. They just work on the computer or like videos.
Most likely in another 10 years, people won't even carry notebooks. They're worthless. Why would you? You know, think about all the problems having paper notes. You can lose them. You know, you can not be able to read them because you wrote them in a hurry. You know, the fact that maybe you'll forget it and won't bring it with you somewhere. Because, I mean, if you have to have a notebook for each class, that's a lot of material, right? If you carry one tablet, that can be your textbook and your notes. They're saved to the cloud, so you can never lose them. Because they're typed, you can actually read them. In fact, you can also take pictures, as you guys have. So you have all the images the teachers uses in class. I mean, there's so many advantages to using them. Why wouldn't you, you know? The thing is, how much cheaper are they nowadays? Not necessarily iPads in general, although I remember they were $1,200 when they first came out. So comparatively, it's like what, half? About $600 now?
They want to sell them, so if reducing the price makes them be sold, and
Or to use an economist's terms, by lowering the price, you increase the demand. Now,
like right now the 6 Plus is very expensive, but then later when they come out with the 7 or 8, that's going to be more expensive than the 6 Plus is going to be.
Now let's talk about this for a second. If you're so poor that you can barely afford food, are you going to go buy a tablet?
No.
No. Okay. So what about the middle class folks who have enough money to feed their families and have a house and that, and they have a little extra cash for them? They buy them. Most likely. I mean, if they can reach them through advertising and create demand amongst them, yes, absolutely. What about the rich and the super rich? Will they buy them?
Yes.
Yeah, but here's...
Buy like 5 of them.
What's that?
If they have children, they'll probably buy like 5.
Well, that's a big if, though, isn't it? They'll buy one, sure, but they're probably not going to buy a whole bunch of them, because remember, they're a small percentage of the population. So even if they all buy one, that doesn't really have the desired effect. That's limiting, that's in essence, to use economic terms, there's a limited supply of buyers in the super rich category. Besides, I think sometimes we think that rich people spend a ton of money on crap because, you know, you see like mansions, they have big houses and cars, things like that. The thing is, most super rich don't. Most super rich people don't buy really crazy cars, things. They just buy normal stuff, and they tend to be pretty cheap. They don't care. There's a reason they become rich in the first place. They don't spend their money, they save it. For instance, Sam Altman, the guy who founded Walmart, right? Whenever he bought a car, like he basically wore overalls and like flannel for most of his life, and he drove a pickup truck, and he paid cash for a used pickup truck. He'd drive it so it literally wouldn't run anymore. Then he bought another used pickup truck and continued on forever. In fact, I remember hearing a story one time that he went into one of his own stores and no one recognized him because it just looked like somebody shopping there. This guy owned all of them. So, I digress. That doesn't drive industry like the middle class does. So if you look at an economy like India, while they might be strong by numbers, they tend to be weaker because they're not self-sustainable. You need a strong distribution of income. A very wide gap of income inequality is not good for an economy.
Sometimes I wish we can have iPads and tablets right there.
Wait, so can you like shorten your explanation of the full gist of this?
Yeah. So basically what I'm saying here is that there's a problem with poverty in India. That's it. One of the ways they're trying to deal with this, though, is education. India, they've been stressing education for years, and actually there's been a significant number of people coming from countries like India into the United States for education and to attend our universities, also Europe and other places as well. So let's talk population density, the number of people in these places. Honestly, I don't remember at this point which has the higher population. It kind of goes back and forth between China and India. But this map and this map shows the distribution of the population in India and China. And basically it's showing the concentration of people, how many people there are in these places, their population size and things like that. How has China had to try to deal with their population problem?
Having one child.
One child. Is that still around? No.
Not.
They've got rid of the one-child policy because it's creating more problems. All right, take care, guys. That was the last slide, by the way.
Have a good weekend.
You as well.